Black girls like you should stick to cleaning, not spinning fairy tales about Navy SEAL mom. With one cruel stroke of her red pen, Mrs. Margaret branded Sienna Washington a liar in front of the entire class, and Oak Creek High became a nightmare. Because as Sienna stood up for her mother's honor, the bullying escalated, humiliated, shoved, cast out, and left to suffer under the watchful eyes of a teacher who thrived on cruelty. But everything changed the moment thunder shook the school grounds. A military helicopter descended, and Sienna's imaginary mother, Commander Yuri Williams, stepped out in full dress uniform. In that instant, every bully in Oak Creek wished they'd never crossed her path. Are you watching this on your phone, tablet, or TV? Stay with us and hit subscribe. You won't believe the secrets that unravel behind Oak Creek's flawless reputation. No one at Oak Creek ever expected a black girl to dream too big, especially not in Mrs. Margaret's advanced American history. The air in that classroom crackled with silent rules. Speak softly, never contradict, and above all, don't dare step outside the place this town assigned you at birth. Sienna Washington, 16, with sharp eyes behind thick glasses, carried a different kind of defiance. She knew every smirk that flickered on her classmates' lips when her hand shot up, every loaded pause before Mrs. Margaret, always so impeccably pressed and grinning with the brittle polish of someone who never missed a Sunday service, would sigh and allow her to speak. On this Monday, sunlight spilled through the blinds in harsh, slanted stripes as Mrs. Margaret announced the week's essay prompt, her voice syrupy with false warmth. Tell us about a hero in your family. Someone real. Someone whose life you know well. Her eyes swept the room, but settled predictably on Sienna, as if daring her to try something foolish. The room was a theater of posturing. Bryce Whitaker, Oak Creek's golden boy, varsity quarterback, bone-white smile, legacy student, lounged with one foot up spinning a football on his knee. When he caught Sienna's gaze, his mouth curled in a slow, practiced sneer. To him, she was a glitch in the perfect image of Oak Creek. Out of place, out of luck, out of bounds. The bell rang for presentations, and Sienna's name was the first on Mrs. Margaret's list. She rose, hands trembling just enough to betray her excitement. She didn't look at anyone but her paper. My mother, Sienna began, her voice steadying with each word, is the bravest person I know. She is a phantom on the ocean. She commands SEAL Team 6. She goes where the darkness is thickest so other families can sleep safe at night. A beat of silence, then laughter, loud and ugly, bounced off the whiteboard. Bryce snorted. Navy SEALs don't let in women, much less a black one. Your mom probably just mops the floors on base. Be real. The laughter doubled. Sienna stood, heart pounding, staring straight at Mrs. Margaret, hoping for one. Just one moment of adult protection. Mrs. Margaret's eyes glinted with something meaner than skepticism. Sienna, she said slowly, as if pronouncing a sentence, I told you to write about the truth, not fairy tales. You may not have much, but honesty is free. You should learn to use it. A hush fell. Bryce's smile grew sharper. The rest of the class craned their necks, watching Sienna shrink. Mrs. Margaret pressed on, her voice rising for effect. Some of us here are Blue Star mothers. My son serves proudly. He's not hiding behind stories or false glory. He earns respect. He doesn't invent it. The word Blue Star mother lingered in the air like a trophy. Some students applauded. Sienna tried to steady her breathing, tried not to show how those words sliced at the only pride she had left. Mrs. Margaret crossed the room, heels striking the floor like the verdicts of a judge, and snatched the essay from Sienna's trembling hand. She flipped to the title page where Sienna had written carefully in bold letters, Hero. Without a pause, the teacher drew a vicious red slash through the word. The pen hovered, then carved new letters above it. Liar. She turned the essay so the class could see, brandishing it like evidence in a trial. Let this be a lesson, she said coldly. Lying gets you nowhere. No one wants to hear about fake heroes. Not in this school. Not in my classroom. Sienna could feel the room closing in, the sound of Bryce's snickering. The hush of those who were glad it wasn't their turn. She swallowed the burn in her throat and blinked hard, refusing to give Mrs. Margaret the victory of seeing her cry. "Return to your seat," the teacher snapped. "And tomorrow, bring something real, even if it's embarrassing, even if it hurts." Sienna sat down, fists clenched so tight her nails left crescent in her palms. The word liar burned red on the paper, an accusation she couldn't erase. The bell rang again, signaling the end of class, but the real lesson hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Here, your truth will always be marked for destruction. As the students filed out, Sienna gathered her shattered courage and the ruined essay. Under her breath, she whispered a promise that only she could hear. "I will show you who my mother is. I will show you all." But she could not know. None of them could. The nightmare was only beginning. The cafeteria at Oak Creek was a kingdom ruled by noise and unspoken laws. Every table was a thief. Athletes, honor students, drama kids, and those who drifted around the margins, always half expecting a chair to be yanked away. Sienna usually slipped into the far corner, back pressed to the wall, her tray a shield. But today she clutched something different in her fist. A Navy SEAL challenge coin, dark bronze, heavy and cold. She had slipped it from her mother's keepsake box, the only physical proof she could offer a world that spat on her word. She waited until the room thinned out, then crossed the floor to Bryce's table. Bryce, surrounded by his pack, tore open a bag of chips and watched her approach with mock surprise. Sienna drew a deep breath. "This," she held up the coin, the golden trident catching the overhead light, "is my mother's. She earned it when she was deployed with SEAL Team 6. You called me a liar. I want you to see the truth." The laughter that followed was vicious. "Oh, so your mom shops on eBay now." Bryce's voice was loud enough to turn heads. He snatched the coin from her palm, rolling it between his fingers. "Where'd you steal this? Goodwill or some army surplus bin?" His boys crowded around, eyes gleaming with the thrill of a new humiliation. "Show us the receipt, Sienna." One Jared. "What?" "No Amazon box." "I didn't steal it," she insisted, voice cracking. But Bryce was already climbing onto his seat, raising the coin overhead like a prize fighter with a championship belt. "Attention, Oak Creek," Bryce shouted. "We got ourselves a hero here. Or maybe a thief, 'cause only a thief pretends to be military." He turned, addressing his audience, hungry for the mob's approval. "You know what that's called, Sienna? Stolen valor. People go to jail for that." Phones flashed out. TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, an endless parade of eyes capturing her shame, her pain, her desperate protest. A girl in a cheerleader uniform pointed her camera at Sienna's face, laughing. "Tell us again about your secret agent, Mommy. Pose with your coin, liar." A wave of chanting rolled through the tables. Liar, liar, liar. Food was banged against trays. Shoes stomped. Every kid competing to outshout the next. Sienna lunged for the coin, tears starting to sting her eyes. But Bryce jerked it out of reach, sending her stumbling backward. He looked her up and down, voice dripping with disgust. "Next time, bring some real proof. Or just admit you wish you were one of us." A hand shoved her shoulder. She stumbled, her tray clattering to the floor. Spaghetti and milk splattering across her sweater and jeans. The humiliation was total. Greasy noodles sticking to her chest, the sting of chocolate milk in her hair. The laughter hit a new crescendo. She bent to scoop up her ruined lunch, but Bryce stepped forward, holding the coin between two fingers, as if it were something filthy. "Let me show you where lies belong," he said, voice low and clear. Every eye on him. He marched to the row of recycling bins at the end of the cafeteria, made a dramatic show of turning the coin over in his hand. Then, with a flick of his wrist, tossed it into the blue bin. Plastic and metal clanging as it disappeared from sight. "That's where your stories go, Sienna. That's all they're worth." A final wave of derision swept the cafeteria. She heard her name turned into a punchline twisted into a new nickname. Valor Girl, a hashtag instantly born, spreading faster than a bruise. She stared at the recycling bin as the crowd slowly dispersed, the other students sliding back into their private dramas. No one offered a hand. No one cared that her cheeks burned or her eyes overflowed. Not a single adult in sight? Sienna moved in a daze, picking noodles from her sweater, refusing to cry, refusing to scream, refusing most of all to run. She walked to the bin, reached inside, her arms searching through the sticky soup of soda cans and half-eaten sandwiches. Her fingers closed on the cold, familiar edge of the challenge coin. As she pulled it free, a single drop of ketchup rolled down the side. As red and accusatory as Mrs. Margaret's pen the day before, she clenched the coin so tightly her knuckles blanched. The cafeteria was emptying now, Bryce's laughter echoing against tile and glass. But behind the glass and the staff office, a pair of watchful eyes narrowed, seeing not just the spectacle, but the truth everyone else refused to face. Sienna left the cafeteria, coin burning in her palm, her story still untold but not unnoticed. Rumors moved through Oak Creek faster than the morning bell. Sienna felt them before she heard them. Quick hush in the hallway, a sideways glance from students who just last week had ignored her completely. She could taste it in the air. Fresh cruelty sharper than before, and now it wore the face of the adults who were supposed to protect her. Mrs. Margaret sat in the teacher's lounge, her back perfectly straight, clutching her mug like it was a scepter. She pressed the speakerphone button on her desk, dialing the number listed for Sienna's mother. Again, the call hit a wall of impersonal authority. This voicemail is not accepting messages at this time. Her lips tightened. Around her, other teachers shuffled papers, whispering in the soft, dangerous way only teachers could, making judgments sound like facts, passing verdicts with a frown or a single well-placed sigh. "Still nothing?" asked Mr. Dalton, the chemistry teacher, not bothering to lower his voice. "No," Mrs. Margaret answered, her tone heavy with implication. "It's always voicemail." "One wonders, doesn't one?" She let the phone rest, eyes lingering on a faded photograph in her wallet. Her son, Kyle, in Crisp's uniform, a picture as out of date as her values. To the world, she was a blue star mother, but in secret, that star had burned out years ago. Kyle's dishonorable discharge was a wound she hid behind scorn for others, behind the armor of school policy and whispered poison. But no secret stayed secret for long at Oak Creek, and when Mrs. Margaret wanted to wound, she aimed for the kill. By noon, Sienna's story had mutated. In the teacher's lounge and between classes, Mrs. Daydun, Margaret made sure to drop a word here, a raised eyebrow there. "I just hope Sienna's home life is all right," she mused to Miss Carter in the copy room. "We know so little. Some students, well, sometimes they make up stories to cover other things." I'd hate to think her voice drifted, inviting speculation. Miss Carter, who had seen enough pain to recognize it in a child's eyes, frowned, but said nothing. It didn't matter. The story was out. Sienna was trouble, or alone, or worse. By afternoon, a handful of students traded their own versions of the tale. "Heard her mom's in jail," one whispered by the water fountain. "My brother said she's in foster care. That's why she's so weird. She's always staring at her phone, probably waiting for her next court date." Another chimed in. Sienna felt the words before she heard them, saw the clusters of kids who parted when she walked by, the sudden stops in conversation, the way no teacher met her gaze for more than a second. All the while, Bryce strutted through the halls like Oak Creek's untouchable prince. But after school, the mask slipped. Alone in the boys' locker room, Bryce fumbled through his gym bag, hands shaking. He yanked out a prescription bottle, popped 2 tiny white pills, and swallowed them dry, his face contorting as the taste hit his tongue. A moment later, he slumped onto the bench, head in hands, shoulders heaving. The pills dulled the ache, but never erased it, never shut up the voice of his father. The politician never soothed the hollowest left by a mother too drunk to care. Each new humiliation he heaped on Sienna was another attempt to drown his own shame, to feel in control even for a moment. He left the locker room just as the final bell rang, slipping back into the role of bully with practiced ease. For Sienna, the cruelty followed her everywhere. In the bathroom, she overheard 2 juniors giggling about orphans and liars. In the cafeteria, someone knocked her tray from her hands, then apologized with an exaggerated wink, as if she should be grateful for the attention. That evening, exhausted and numb, Sienna returned to her locker. As she twisted the combination, she noticed a fresh, toxic smell, spray paint still sharp in the air. When the door swung open, her breath caught in her throat across the metal in jagged red letters. "Go back to the hood." Her fingers trembled. She looked up and down the hall. No one met her eyes. The words burned into her memory deeper than any insult hurled in daylight. She wanted to scream, to tear down the locker, to scrub the paint away with her bare hands. Instead, she stood motionless, the hallway spinning around her. Rage, humiliation, and a desperate sense of isolation crashed through her. At that moment, something broke. Not in defeat, but in resolve. Enough. Sienna wasn't going to hide anymore. She wouldn't let her mother's name be dragged through the mud. Wouldn't let these adults and children decide what was true. Her jaw set. Sienna slammed the locker closed and stalked down the hall, ignoring the stares, ignoring the whispers that chased her like ghosts. Tomorrow, she would face Mrs. Margaret directly. She would demand justice, demand an apology, demand at last respect. But she had no idea the confrontation would spiral far beyond words, into violence that would leave scars no one could ignore. Oak Creek after hours was a different world. It's always stripped bare of noise, classrooms washed in shadow. The pretense of civility peeled away by silence. Sienna stood outside room 214, her mother's photograph pressed flat in her trembling palm. The image was grainy, almost faded from years tucked inside a wallet. Her mother, Yuri Williams, proud and unyielding in navy dress blues, metals gleaming against dark skin. Eyes narrowed with that same steely resolve Sienna saw in her own reflection. Inside, Mrs. Margaret sat behind her desk, flipping through test papers as if nothing in the world could touch her. But when Sienna knocked and stepped in, the older woman's posture stiffened, lips flattening to a bloodless line. "If this is about your grade, it's not," Sienna cut in, her voice unexpectedly clear. She walked up to the desk, holding out the photo. "I want you to look at this. I want you to see her. My mother, the woman you called a lie." Mrs. Margaret took the photo with the tips of her fingers, barely glancing at it. The silence between them was brittle, humming with something far uglier than simple disbelief. "She's in uniform," Sienna said, voice cracking. "That's not some Halloween costume. That's Navy. You owe me an apology." Behind them, the classroom door inched open. Bryce hidden in the shadows, eyes glinting with anticipation. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. Hungry for fresh humiliation, Mrs. Margaret stared at the photo, knuckles whitening. For the briefest second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Doubt worming its way through a fortress of prejudice and pride, then something inside her snapped shut. Her voice, when it came, was sharper than broken glass. "I don't owe you anything, Sienna. I owe the school the truth, and I won't let you soil its reputation with your sick little fantasies." She slammed the photo down, the edge catching Sienna's hand. Sienna didn't flinch. "You don't know anything about my family," she shot back. "You don't care about the truth. You just want someone to blame. I'm not your scapegoat." Mrs. Margaret's hands shook. The mask of the Blue Star mother was slipping. Beneath it, the raw wound of her own disgrace festered. Her son, her pride, her legacy, would never wear that uniform again. His shame, a stain she could never scrub away. Sienna's voice, clear and relentless, felt like salt on every old wound. "Do you know what it's like?" Sienna pressed on, "to be told every day that you're nothing? To fight for scraps of respect in a place that hates what you are? My mother fought for this country. She fought for people like you. And you'd rather tear her down than admit you're wrong." "Enough." Mrs. Margaret's voice cracked, rage, grief, humiliation boiling over. She snatched the photograph, ripping it in half. Then again and again. Shredded pieces fluttering to the floor like dead leaves. Sienna froze. Then she dropped to her knees, hands desperately gathering the fragments, her breaths coming in ragged sobs. "You," she choked, anger sharpening her grief. "You're the one who's ashamed. You lost, and you want the world to bleed with you." "I'm not afraid of you, Mrs. Margaret. You're just a coward hiding behind your rules." The insult landed with surgical precision. The older woman's eyes bulged, face flushed a dangerous red. Every failure, every denied appeal for her disgraced son's honor, Every sleepless night spent clutching a fading photo came roaring to the surface. Her voice was nothing but venom. You little liar. You filthy, arrogant little liar. People like you are the rot in this country's core, always playing victim, always crying for handouts, always pretending you're more than what you are. Sienna recoiled but held her ground. You can say whatever you want. You can hate me. You can even hate my mother. But you can't erase what she's done. Mrs. Margaret's fury spiraled into something monstrous. She rounded the desk in 3 strides, high heels striking the tile like gunshots. Sienna, still on her knees, barely saw the kick coming, a flash of black leather, the sharp agony exploding in her ribs as the toe of Mrs. Margaret's shoe drove into her side. Sienna crumpled, body crashing against the base of the door, pain radiating through her chest. Mrs. Margaret towered above her, hair disheveled, face twisted into a mask of hatred. Get out. Get out of my classroom. And don't you ever speak of your imaginary mother again. Go back to your kind. Go back to your kind. Back to your ghetto. This school isn't for you. Bryce, breathless in the shadowed doorway, didn't laugh. For a brief moment, his eyes widened. The spectacle rawer than anything he'd bargained for. Sienna lay curled on the floor, clutching her side, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The humiliation, the pain, the taste of metal in her mouth. She tried to speak, but no words came. Her world shrank to the sound of her own heartbeat, pounding in her ears like war drums. Mrs. Margaret leaned in, spat one last insult. You'll never be more than a lie. But then a sound, distant at first, then growing. Blades slicing the air, a low, thunderous vibration rattling the classroom windows. The unmistakable roar of a military helicopter descending. The glass trembled, dust dancing on the sills. Sienna's fingers closed around a single scrap of her mother's photo as she stared at the sky outside, her voice barely a whisper, but steady with promise. My mother isn't imaginary. She's home. The deafening thunder of helicopter blades sent a wave of panic rolling over Oak Creek's manicured football field. Students scattered from the bleachers, books tumbling, coaches barking orders. No one obeyed. Even the cockiest seniors who thought nothing could shake. The world they ruled shrank from the dark shape descending from the sky. The helicopter hit the ground with military precision, its doors flying open before the rotor stopped. From within, Commander Yuri Williams stepped out. Every detail of her uniform razor sharp. Gold insignia flashed across her chest. Medals layered in a silent testimony to danger survived, honor earned. And battles no one in this privileged town could even imagine. 2 SEALs flanked her, stone-faced, scanning the crowd with the ice-cold discipline of men used to following only the toughest. Every step Uri took radiated command. Her boots barely left a mark on the field, but her presence flattened the usual hierarchy of the school in an instant. The principal, Mr. Higgins, hustled across the grass, tie flapping, face frozen in a smile that was meant to charm, but only trembled. Mrs. Margaret trailed behind him, adjusting her hair, dabbing at her cheeks, desperately trying to manufacture composure. Welcome, Higgins called, too loud, voice cracking. We weren't expecting. Is this for a special assembly? Margaret's smile was brittle as glass. She flashed her Blue Star Mother pin and stepped forward, trying to guess which hand to shake, which story to tell. Her gaze flickered with greedy hope. A military inspection, maybe, or a chance to bask in reflected glory. But Yuri didn't slow, didn't even glance at them. She walked straight through their greeting, the sals falling in beside her. The crowd parted. It was not deference. It was awe, fear, and the ancient instinct to move aside for power you cannot fight. On the sidelines, an ambulance waited, red lights off. But a small group had gathered. School nurse, a security guard, and Sienna sitting on the bench, one arm pressed to her ribs, eyes red but unbroken. Her ruined sweater still bore the stains from lunch and the pain of Margaret's kick. She looked impossibly small in the midst of all that chaos. Yuri's face, set in hard lines, barely flickered as she took in her daughter's condition. But for a fraction of a second, something primal, rage, anguish, flared in her eyes. She knelt before Sienna, the medals and the reputation and the world's expectations falling away, leaving only a mother with a broken child. Sienna reached for her, voice shaky but certain. "Mom." Margaret's mask cracked. Her posture wilted. Her face blanched as if the blood had drained from her body, leaving her exposed, trembling, and lost. For the first time, she truly looked at Sienna and then at Yuri, and saw what power really meant. "Who did this to you?" Yuri's words were not loud, but they left no air in the world for lies. Sienna's eyes flickered, a silent message passing between them. Margaret shuffled backward, nearly tripping over her own heels. The nurse tried to explain, but Yuri cut her off with a glance. "Let my daughter speak." Sienna hesitated, breath rattling in her chest. It was she didn't need to finish. Yuri stood, her full height, commanding silence from every student, teacher, and parent still within earshot. Yuri's hand went to her sunglasses. Slowly, she pulled them off, revealing eyes sharp as razors. Eyes that had stared down death and cowardice in a dozen war zones. She locked her gaze onto Margaret, whose composure was now gone, hands shaking, lips working silently. Yuri's voice cut through the field, clear and merciless. "Are you the one who taught my daughter that black women can't serve this country? That no matter what we do, we'll always be liars to you?" No one moved. The principal's jaw hung open. Margaret swayed as if the words had struck her physically. The entire field fell into a silence so total it seemed the air itself held its breath. Margaret tried to answer, but only a whimper came out. The students closest to her drew back, as if the contagion of her cowardice might spread. Some even looked at Sienna with new eyes, eyes that registered maybe for the first time. The monstrous unfairness they had witnessed and helped to create. Yuri knelt again, this time gathering Sienna gently, her movements precise and steady, a living shield against the ugliness of the world. The commander's presence changed everything. The rules of Oak Creek had been rewritten. Margaret's power was gone, crumbling into dust beneath the weight of the truth. Yet, as the crowd gawked, held captive by the force of what had just happened, no one noticed the trembling in Margaret's hands, or the way she shrank into herself, a false idol, toppled by the very justice she had spent her life denying. A deathly silence settled over the field. The shock had only just begun. No one yet knew how deep the reckoning would cut. The principal's office, for once, felt like a cage. Principal Higgins perched behind his polished desk, fingers laced so tightly the knuckles went white. Margaret sat opposite, her once impeccable composure collapsing in slow motion. Blotched cheeks, trembling chin, eyes darting from door to window as if planning an escape. Across from them, Commander Yuri Williams stood tall and motionless, flanked by two silent SAS. Her uniform demanded respect. Her presence suffocated any excuse before it could be spoken. Margaret opened the meeting with brittle aggression. "This is a misunderstanding. Sienna's a troubled student. She's been caught lying before. What happened on the field?" She tripped. Any bruises are from her own clumsiness. She forced a weak smile toward Higgins, desperate for an ally. The principal's reply was a nervous cough. "I'm sure there's a way to resolve this. Quietly. No need to involve outside authorities." Surely, Yuri cut him off with a look that broke no dissent. She set a thick manila folder on the desk. The flap bore an official stamp, and in crisp lettering, United States Navy Confidential. She spoke with the cold precision of someone who'd had to deliver bad news in war zones. Her words heavy enough to flatten denials before they formed. "There's no misunderstanding here. I've brought documentation of my daughter's record, her grades, her conduct, her citizenship awards, her volunteer work. Every accusation you've leveled is refuted by facts." She paused, letting the silence grow unbearable. Then she turned to Margaret, eyes narrowing. "But I also brought another file, one that's relevant to you, Mrs. Margaret. I suggest you look closely." With hands trembling, Margaret reached for the file, but didn't open it. "I don't see what this has to do with me." Yuri's gaze never left her. "Perhaps you recognize the name. Private First Class Kyle Margaret, formerly assigned to SEAL Team 6. Dishonorably discharged, stripped of rank, all commendations revoked. Do you know who signed the order?" She let the question hang, then answered it herself. I did. A shocked silence filled the office. Higgins shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat blooming on his brow. Margaret's mouth opened and closed, words failing. The color drained from her face, leaving her almost ashen. My son, he was set up. He never got a fare. Yuri's voice was cold steel. Your son endangered his team. He refused a direct order, abandoned his post in combat, and was caught distributing hate speech against Black and Hispanic soldiers. You want to talk about lies and shame, Mrs. Margaret? Let's start with that. Margaret sagged in her chair, memories and humiliation crashing down like a wave. He was always a good boy. No, Yuri replied. Each word a verdict. He was protected by your blind pride, but I couldn't protect my unit from him. The truth cost him his career. And now, Mrs. Margaret, the truth will cost you yours. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth. Higgins stared at the folder as if it might explode. Yuri leaned forward, her tone unyielding. Let's be clear. I didn't come here seeking revenge. My history with your son has nothing to do with your conduct as a teacher, but the cruelty, the lies, and the violence I've seen in this school come from you. From your need to control, to destroy, to make others pay for your failures. She swept her gaze around the room, daring anyone to challenge her. You may fool your peers, Mrs. Margaret. You may have fooled this principal, but I won't let you destroy my daughter. I already had to remove your son to protect those under my command, and I will not hesitate to remove you for the sake of every child in this school. Margaret shrank, eyes glistening, lower lip quivering. Her whole body seemed to collapse inward. She had spent years weaponizing Oak Creek's reputation to shield herself from consequence. That armor was gone, vaporized in seconds by the one woman she could not threaten. Yuri turned to Principal Higgins. I'm formally requesting that Mrs. Margaret be suspended, pending a full investigation. Until then, I expect her to have no contact with students. If this school refuses, I will involve the Department of Defense and the State Attorney's Office. Higgins stammered, sweat trickling down his temple. Of course, Commander, whatever you think is best. Please, let's just keep this discreet. Yuri didn't smile. Nothing about this is discreet anymore. As she stood, the seals moved to block the door. Outside, the sharp click of dress shoes signaled the arrival of legal counsel and uniformed officers. Military, not local police. A tight perimeter was already forming. The school quietly, but unmistakably, placed on lockdown for the investigation. Margaret sat motionless, defeated and exposed. Her power, like her pride, was in ruins. The legal lockdown swept through the school, but as doors sealed and whispers intensified, new scandals and old ghosts began to surface, threatening to shake Oak Creek to its core. The heartbeat of Oak Creek was hidden behind a steel-reinforced door marked server room. Authorized personnel only. Rows of humming machines flickered in the dark, their screens alive with hundreds of security camera feeds. Each a silent witness to the day's cruelties and conspiracies. Principal Higgins' lead commander Yuri Williams through the labyrinthine back hallways. His gait a little too quick, his words coming out oily and over-rehearsed. I understand your concern, Commander, he said, trying to sound sympathetic. It's standard procedure for the district to review footage in these cases. We're all on the same side here, I assure you. Yuri's expression did not change. Her patience had worn thin after years of bureaucracy and polite lies. She could spot a stall from a mile away. All I want is to see the raw footage from room 214 yesterday after the bell, she said, voice cold and flat. Higgins swiped his card, unlocking the door with a click. Inside, the air was cool and sterile. The only movement, the restless blinking of the monitors. He sat at the console, typing with deliberate slowness. Let's see. Yes. Room 214. About that, he paused, face twisting into a look of contrived regret. I'm afraid there was a malfunction. Our cameras were down for maintenance at that exact time. Unfortunate, really. Yuri stared him down. How convenient. What about the backups? Also affected, I'm afraid. We're upgrading our system. Security grant. You know how it is. Higgins spread his hands, as if apologizing for a broken coffee machine, not a missing piece of evidence in a case of assault. She pressed, "You're telling me a student was injured in your school and you have no video?" "Nothing." Higgins shook his head, practiced now in the art of the bureaucratic lie. "No video, no witnesses. And if I'm honest, Commander, the faculty are united in their statement that Sienna fell. Accidents happen, especially with students who have behavioral challenges. Yuri felt the familiar sting of institutional gaslighting, the same tone she'd heard from men in power all her life. Nothing to see, nothing to prove, nothing to change." But something in Higgins's face caught her eye. His confidence was not the bravado of an honest man, but the cool, dead calm of someone holding more cards than he should. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Why are you really protecting Mrs. Margaret?" Higgins smirked, eyes cold. "You're not from here, Commander. You don't know how things work. Margaret's been with this school for 20 years. Her word is good enough for our board, our parents, our donors, and she's helped me with certain matters." When discretion was required, he paused, voice dropping to a near whisper. "No one wants a scandal. Not the school, not the town, not the parents, especially not with, outsiders watching." Yours jaw tightened. "So that's it. No video, no scandal, no justice?" "Exactly." Higgins leaned back, folding his arms. "Lawsuits cost money. Donors hate negative press. I'm not about to lose my job for a girl who doesn't even belong here. Oak Creek has a reputation to protect, Commander, and people like you and your daughter. Well, you're not part of that reputation." He smiled, slow and ugly. "If you push this, you'll only make things harder for her. For both of you. I'd think twice before causing a fuss." Outside the server room, in the shadow of the door, Bryce lingered, clutching his phone so tightly his knuckles went white. He'd followed the meeting unseen, guilt-wearing with self-preservation. On his screen, the secret he'd kept since that day. Shaky footage, but clear enough. Margaret's voice shrill, her kick brutal, Sienna's collapse echoing off the empty desks. He wanted to delete it, to forget. But every word from Higgins made his stomach twist with disgust. What if just once he did the right thing? Back inside, Higgins let his guard down, lips curling in a contemptuous sneer as he shut down the console. No video, no evidence. The word of a black student against an honored teacher. "Good luck, Commander." The words hung in the air, acidic and final. But Yuri's eyes didn't waver. She knew this battle wouldn't be won in offices or on paper. The real war was for the truth, wherever it hid. Yuri left the server room, resolved. If the system refused to speak, she'd find the voices buried within it. The truth was out there, waiting raw and dangerous behind every locked door. The world outside Oak Creek's gym was loud with shouts and the metallic clang of locker doors. But inside the boys' locker room, the air was heavy and still. Sienna moved like a shadow through the empty hallways, her side aching with every breath. But determination steadied her steps. The official investigation had frozen everything. Classes canceled, students sequestered in classrooms. But Sienna knew waiting would only bury the truth deeper. She needed a witness. Someone who'd seen what Margaret did. Someone who could crack the fortress of lies. Down the corridor, she heard a thud, a fist against metal, then a muffled curse. She stopped at the threshold of the locker room, senses sharpened by weeks of survival. She pushed the door, letting it creak just enough to announce her presence. At the back, slumped against the benches, sat Bryce, the golden boy, now pallid and trembling, sweat slicking his hair to his forehead. His eyes were wild, unfocused, darting to a bottle of prescription pills clutched tight in his shaking hand. Sienna froze, torn between anger and something else. A flicker of understanding, a memory of her mother's voice. Never ignore the wounded, even when they wear the enemy's armor. Bryce didn't notice her at first. He fumbled to pop a pill into his mouth, but dropped it. It rolled under the bench and he cursed again. Voice cracked and raw. She watched for another second. Saul really saw the collapse behind his swagger. Bryce Whittaker. Not the terror of the cafeteria. Not the king of football. Just a boy crumbling beneath a weight he could never admit to. A loud knock echoed down the hallway. "Whitaker, you in there?" It was Coach Lee, voice tight with suspicion. Bryce panicked, scrambling to scoop up the pills. His hands betrayed him, the bottle rattling against the tiles. Sienna stepped forward fast and quiet. Without a word, she crouched, gathering the scattered pills and slipping them back into the bottle. She pressed it into his hand, then tucked it into his gym bag, shoving the bag beneath the bench, just as the door swung open. Coach Lee stepped inside, eyes scanning the room. He saw Sienna first. "What are you doing here?" "This is the boys' locker room. I was looking for my backpack. I left it here by mistake," she lied, steady as stone. The coach's gaze lingered, but he saw nothing amiss. Bryce looked up, mask back in place, jaw set, eyes hooded. "I was helping her look," he said, voice almost convincing. Coach Lee grunted. "Don't let it happen again." He turned and left, door slamming behind him. Silence settled between them. Bryce stared at Sienna, suspicion and shame wearing in his eyes. "Why'd you do that?" His words were jagged. "You could have let him find me." Sienna sat beside him on the bench, the distance between enemy lines suddenly much smaller. "I don't want to see anyone else destroyed in this place," she said quietly. "My mom always says, you don't leave the wounded behind. Even your enemies deserve a chance." Bryce swallowed, his bravado draining away. "You don't know what it's like. Every day pretending nothing's wrong. Dad's never home unless there's a camera around. All he cares about is his next election. My mom, she hasn't been sober in months. If anyone found out about this," he gestured to the pills, voice cracking, "I'm done. They'd kick me off the team. I'd be nothing." Sienna met his gaze. No pity in her eyes, just clarity. "I know what it's like to be invisible until someone needs to blame you. You lash out so no one sees you hurting." Bryce's facade crumbled. "Why do you care?" "After everything I did," Sienna shrugged, a tired half-smile on her lips. "Because if I become like you, if I start kicking people when they're down, then they win. That's what people like Margaret want. Us tearing each other apart so we never look up." For a moment, Bryce was just a kid, terrified, exhausted, wishing for rescue. "I don't deserve your help." Sienna's voice was gentle but unflinching. "Doesn't matter what you deserve. What matters is what you do next." He looked away, ashamed. "Why are you even still here after all this?" She answered without hesitation. "Because my mother taught me never to back down, especially when everyone expects you to." He nodded, the lesson sinking in, then voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." She stood, wincing at the pain in her ribs, and offered him a hand. He took it, uncertain but grateful. Outside, the sun had started to set, streaking the sky with the colors of a world that kept moving, no matter who fell or who rose. But inside the locker room, something had shifted. The lines were no longer as clear. The enemy had a face, a history, and a wound of his own. Sienna's kindness had left its mark, a fissure in the wall Bryce built around himself, and a new possibility for truth, if he could only summon the courage. Yet even as a fragile understanding formed, Sienna sensed that Bryce was not the only one with secrets, and not the only one whose choices could change everything. Oak Creek's basement was a forgotten labyrinth. Pipes rattled overhead, janitorial carts lined the halls, and the scent of bleach masked older secrets. Down here, Mr. Earl moved through shadows, unseen and unthanked. His footsteps soft from decades of walking other people's messes. At 70, his back was bowed, but his eyes missed nothing. Most students passed him by as if he were furniture, a necessary inconvenience in the machinery of the school. They never saw the quiet intelligence behind his stoop, or the veteran's discipline in the way he cleaned the same corners day after day. Only Sienna made a point to greet him. Every morning, rain or shine, a nod and a good morning, Mr. Earl, as if he mattered. He'd seen it all. The cafeteria gears, Margaret's venom, the empty looks from teachers who pretended not to hear the slurs. He'd watched the principal hurry past every injustice. Clipboard in hand, more interested in fundraising galas than the bruises blooming on Sienna's arms. So when the halls cleared for the security investigation, Earl didn't wait for permission. He shuffled down to the staff break room, radio tucked in his breast pocket, headphones quietly humming a military broadcast. Old habits never broken. Today, though, he was listening for something else. He found Commander Yuri Williams in the main office, hunched over paperwork, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but burning with purpose. She looked up when he knocked softly. "Ma'am," he said, voice growly but respectful. She studied him a moment, recognizing the bearing of a soldier. "You're Earl, aren't you?" He nodded. "I seen your name before." "You've got a reputation," she smiled, weary but genuine. "Depends who you ask." "What can I do for you?" Earl hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "I ain't much for talking. Folks forget I'm here mostly, but I watch, I hear, and I keep records." From his pocket, he produced a tiny SD card sealed in a battered envelope. He handed it over. Yuri frowned. "What's this?" He lowered his voice even more. "Camera I set up years ago. They tried to pin a theft on me. Said I was stealing kids' stuff, so I bought a camera. Fixed it in the corner. Keeps me honest, but it catches other things too." He cleared his throat, the weight of confession heavy. "Last week, caught Margaret kicking your girl. Caught her yelling. I saw it all." For a long moment, Yuri said nothing, turning the envelope over in her hands. She saw the pain in his posture, the ache of years spent invisible. "Why are you giving this to me?" Earl met her gaze, steel flickering in his tired eyes. "Sienna always says hello. Never too proud. Reminds me there's good left in this place. Figured she deserved better." Bori's hands trembled as she accepted the card. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." He shrugged, retreating into his old stoic armor. "I know more than they think. All my life, folks treated me like trash, ignored me, blamed me, laughed behind my back. But you know what? Trash sees everything. Trash remembers. And sometimes trash is the only thing that catches the truth in a place like this." He looked away, blinking back emotion. "I hope it helps her. I hope it helps you." Our voice was gentle but resolute. "It does, Earl. It really does." They stood together in the empty hall. A silent pact formed. One old man with nothing left to prove. One mother fighting for her child's dignity. As Yuri walked away, she glanced back. "You're not invisible, Mr. Earl. Not to me." He gave a rare, crooked smile. "Guess that's all I ever wanted." In the hours that followed, Yuri's hands shook as she reviewed the footage. Every frame was a condemnation. Margaret's rage, Sienna's collapse, the casual cruelty painted in high definition. It was evidence no committee could deny. But the system did not break easily. As news of the investigation spread, Principal Higgins moved swiftly. He called an emergency meeting of the Parent-Teacher Association, the real power behind Oak Creek's gleaming facade. Emails were sent, phone calls made, and by nightfall, the auditorium filled with the town's wealthiest, angriest voices. Yuri knew the battle wasn't over. The truth was finally out. But now it had to survive the firestorm waiting upstairs. As the doors of the PTA hall swung open, the real trial began. Not in secret corners, but beneath the full glare of Oak Creek's most ruthless audience. The Oak Creek Auditorium, usually reserved for holiday concerts and donor galas, pulsed with hostility. Parents crowded into the polished seats, whispering, frowning, flashing looks of suspicion. The richest families gathered up front, all faces set, every glance sharpened into a verdict. The walls glittered with school banners, but the mood was anything but celebratory. On stage, Principal Higgins presided with forced gravity. He gripped the microphone and gave his best concerned leader performance. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on short notice. We're here tonight to address the recent disruptions that threaten the peace and reputation of Oak Creek." The lights in the hall seemed harsher than usual. Yuri sat alone near the front. Sienna and a handful of sympathetic teachers just behind her. Margaret's absence screamed through the crowd, but her allies filled the vacuum, their eyes cold. Higgins wasted no time. He raised his hands for silence. It has come to our attention that the presence of military personnel on campus, unannounced, disruptive, has frightened many of our students. He glanced pointedly at Yuri. This is a school, not a base. Our children deserve to feel safe, not policed. A murmur of approval ran through the room. Parents nodded, murmured, exactly. Can you believe this? Higgins pressed on. And regrettably, we have a student, Sienna Washington, at the center of these events. Her behavior has been troubling. There are reports of violence, accusations without merit. We must consider whether Oak Creek remains the right environment for her. Sienna's cheeks burned. She stared down at her shoes, willing herself not to cry. Then, from the second row, Councilman Whitaker rose. In his expensive suit, Bryce's father cut a striking figure. Every inch, the small-town kingmaker. I'd like to speak for the board, he announced, turning to face the crowd. I respect our men and women in uniform. But I cannot condone a military officer intimidating this community or interfering with our school's autonomy. He pivoted, voice sharpening. Commander Williams, you have crossed a line. Using your rank and reputation to force this school's hand, threatening legal action, undermining our principal, frightening our students. These are not the actions of a responsible guest. This is an abuse of power. A chorus of hear swept through the auditorium. He let the words settle, then delivered the blow. If Sienna Washington is not removed, I will personally recommend the board suspend our public-private partnership with Oak Creek. I will call for a full audit of the school's federal grants. Let's see how long we can keep our doors open without that support. Gasps rippled down the aisles. Higgins looked triumphant. Several parents exchanged worried glances, fear suddenly spiking. Yuri stood, taking the microphone with steady hands. My daughter has been the victim of violence and lies. I have evidence, witnesses, recordings, the testimony of those you ignore every day. Is this a school that protects its children or one that protects its image? But her words bounced off a wall of denial. A mother in pearls shot back. Maybe, if your daughter knew her place, none of this would have happened. Another called out, this isn't the Army. We don't want our kids exposed to trauma. You brought this here? Yuri tried again. You think you're safe behind your money and your rules? But there are children here suffering. My daughter is not the problem. Your silence is... A father in a varsity jacket stood, voice booming. We built this school. We pay the taxes. If you don't like how we do things, you can leave. Maybe take your daughter with you. Suddenly, the hall turned ugly. Voices overlapped, rising in volume. Get her out. Enough is enough. This isn't about race. It's about respect. She's a liar, just like her mother. Yuri looked at Higgins. You're going to let them do this? Is this leadership? Higgins raised his palms. Mock, helpless. The community has spoken. I'm just following the will of our parents. I suggest you take their advice, Commander, for your daughter's sake. For a moment, the loneliness in the room was suffocating. Yuri stood her ground, but the crowd pressed closer, the pressure mounting. Sienna shrank into her chair, face hidden, trembling. The chorus of voices became a wall of sound, hostile, relentless, almost gleeful in their cruelty. Suddenly, a new voice pierced the din, clear, young, and furious from the back row. If she leaves, I leave too, and I'll bring every secret in this room with me. The entire auditorium went silent, heads whipped around. Bryce Whitaker stood pale and shaking, eyes locked on his father. I know what you've all done. You want to play games with people's lives? Then let's play. A gasp moved through the room. Even Higgins seemed thrown, his smugness fading. The golden boy of Oak Creek had just broken ranks, turning his back on the world that made him king. For the first time, power shifted, and nothing would ever be the same. For a long moment, the air inside the Oak Creek auditorium was brittle with shock. Parents froze, their mutters smothered by the audacity of Bryce Whitaker's rebellion. Bryce stood, fists clenched at his sides, as if steadying himself against a storm only he could see. Councilman Whitaker, Bryce's father recovered first. His anger was instantaneous and public. "Bryce, sit down. We're not here for your drama." But Bryce, for once, didn't yield. He moved down the aisle, past the stares of classmates who had always followed his lead. He mounted the steps to the stage with a conviction that seemed to surprise even himself. "I'm not sitting down, Dad," he said, voice clear, cracking with old pain and something new resolve. "I've got something to say, and you're going to listen." Whitaker shot out of his seat, faced red, ready to drag his son away. But Commander Yuri Williams stepped forward, blocking him with one sharp military glance. He hesitated, thrown by her silent warning, and Bryce pressed on. Bryce took the microphone from Higgins, who tried half-heartedly to object and face the crowd, his gaze drifting to Sienna, then back to the sea of familiar, judgmental faces. "You all think you know who I am," he began, hands shaking slightly. "Star quarterback, honor roll, son of the councilman, the kid who can do no wrong." He let the sarcasm drip, voice gaining strength with every word. "But you don't know anything? You've never wanted to." A ripple went through the room. Confusion, then fear. Parents shifted in their seats. Teenagers leaned in. Even Sienna sat up, eyes wide, uncertain. Bryce drew a shaky breath. "I was the one who started the rumor about Sienna. I called her a liar. I mocked her in the cafeteria, in the halls. I did things I'm ashamed of. I thought it would make me feel better about myself, but it never did." He paused. The admission was a slap, echoing around the room. "I wasn't alone." Mrs. Margaret encouraged it. "She called Sienna names, told me I was right to make her miserable. She said that people like her didn't belong here, that no one would ever believe her." Murmurs swept the crowd. Margaret's few remaining defenders looked down at their shoes. Bryce's voice faltered, then found new courage. "I filmed something that day, not for proof, but because I thought it'd be funny, but it wasn't funny. It was evil." He pulled out his phone, fingers shaking, and connected it to the projector. For a moment, there was only blackness. Then the recording began to play. Margaret's voice echoed across the auditorium, shrill and unmistakable. "You little liar. You filthy, arrogant little liar. People like you are the rot in this country's core." The video showed her kick, showed Sienna falling, showed the aftermath unfiltered, undeniable. A collective gasp rose from the seats. Parents stared, horrified. Some looked away, unable to watch. Bryce let the footage play, then ended it with a trembling hand. "You want the truth? That's the truth. Not the version you told yourselves so you could sleep at night." His father stepped forward, face thunderous. "You've embarrassed our family. Stop this now." Bryce turned to him, voice low, but carrying. "You want me to be a man, Dad? You want me to be a leader? This is what a man does. He tells the truth even when it hurts." He faced the audience again, voice raw. "You wonder why kids in this town do drugs? Why they crash cars? Why they end up in rehab? It's because we can't breathe under the weight of your expectations. You want perfect, shiny children, but you don't care who we have to hurt or what we have to swallow to become that." He wiped his eyes, unashamed. "My dad's never home unless there's a camera. My mom's drunk half the time. I started using painkillers because nothing else numbed the feeling that I was never enough for any of you." The silence was total. Sienna's eyes filled with tears. Not just for herself, but for the truth. Bryce bared for everyone to see. He looked at her, shame and hope battling in his expression. "Sienna, I'm sorry for every word, every shove, every laugh. You didn't deserve any of it. None of us did." He turned to the crowd one last time. "We all talk about Oak Creek pride, about legacy, about community, but it's a lie. The only legacy here is silence, and I'm done being part of it." He dropped the microphone, the sound echoing like a gunshot. No one moved. Even the mothers who had shouted loudest were quiet, faces pale, eyes darting. Higgins looked as if he might be sick. Councilman Whitaker stood frozen, the image of power shattered. Bryce made his way down the steps, pausing at the edge of the stage. He looked his father in the eye. "You want me to be strong? To take responsibility? Here it is." He turned to Sienna. I'm sorry. Truly, you deserve better. A slow, uncertain applause began from the back. A few brave teachers, a handful of students. Then it spread like a wave, washing away the old order. In the vacuum left by Bryce's confession, the lies and alliances that had ruled Oak Creek began to crumble. The town's elite, its Karens and gatekeepers, were left speechless, forced at last to look at the ugliness they'd denied. The truth at last had a voice, and nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, Oak Creek was no longer a school, but a battleground. Police cruisers lined the curb. News vans swarmed the gates, and the air inside the main office was brittle with the scent of fear and overdue justice. Principal Higgins' hands shook as he poured himself a coffee he never drank. His once commanding presence reduced to a figure haunted by headlines and subpoenas. The evidence was everywhere. Bryce's video, Sienna's bruises, Mr. Earl's recording looping on phones and computer screens. The town's gilded reputation had finally cracked, and nothing could patch it now. Margaret sat alone at one end of the office, hair wild, face blotched, hands trembling so hard she dropped her handkerchief twice. Her lawyer, red-faced and sweating, tried and failed to calm her as the room filled with uniformed officers and grim-faced administrators. Yuri stood at the far wall, arms folded, eyes fixed on the woman who had made her daughter bleed. A detective pressed play on the screen again. Margaret's voice shrill, viperous, filled the room. You little liar. You filthy, arrogant little liar. People like you are the rot in this country's core. Sienna's whimper. The sharp slap of Margaret's kick and the echo of collapsing desks. Evidence as undeniable as sunlight. The silence afterward was electric. A tear rolled down Sienna's cheek, but her chin stayed high. Yuri never moved, never blinked. The detective looked to Margaret. Do you want to make a statement? Margaret's composure fractured. She lurched from her seat, voice rising, careening from denial to rage. This is a setup, she shrieked. A witch hunt. I gave 30 years to this place. I built this school. It's not my fault if some people can't handle the truth. It's not my fault. The world's gone mad, letting people like her. She jabbed a finger at Sienna walking here like they own it. Gasps of horror rippled through the office. Sienna's lawyer started to object, but Margaret spun toward him. Wildeed, you're all cowards. All of you letting this happen to me because you're scared of lawsuits? Scared of the press? Well, I'm not scared. I'm not the villain here. Her words bounced off the glass, growing more desperate. You want to see a villain? Look at her. She turned on Yuri, eyes blazing. You and your kind marching in here, acting like you're better than everyone else, hiding behind your medals, your policies, your diversity quotas. Yuri's jaw set, but she did not respond. The detective spoke, voice cool. That's enough, Mrs. Margaret. You are under investigation for assault, child endangerment, and inciting a hostile environment. Please remain seated. But Margaret was beyond reason now. Her world, the world she'd controlled with fear and whispers, was burning down. It's all ruined. My son, my name, everything. None of this would have happened if you'd just known your place. The officers moved to restrain her, but Margaret, in a last blind lunge, charged across the room toward Yuri, hands clawing, voices screech. You stole everything from me. You've ruined my life. I'll ruin you. Yuri stepped aside, letting Margaret's momentum carry her forward, then spun with the crisp, efficient grace of a seal. In a flash, Margaret was face down on the desk, Yuri's arm gently but firmly pinning her wrist in a hold that spoke of years, spent disarming those who couldn't be reasoned with. The officers moved in, securing Margaret with handcuffs as she howled. Still fighting, still refusing. Tears streaked her face. You don't know what it's like being judged, being hated. Everyone thinking you're nothing. Yuri leaned in, voice low, cold enough to freeze time. Your son was discharged for cowardice. She pressed her lips to Margaret's ear so only she could hear, will go to jail for cruelty. The world will remember you. Not for your service, but for your hate. That's your legacy now. That's all your family has left. Margaret slumped. All strength gone. sobs racking her body as the last shreds of her authority disintegrated. Police led her away. The lawyer trailed. Defeated, Higgins pressed himself against the wall, praying for invisibility. Yuri turned to Sienna, who watched the whole scene in silent awe. For a moment, mother and daughter met eyes equal parts relief, exhaustion, and sorrow. Nothing could restore what was lost, but the cycle of silence was finally broken. The detective addressed the room. There will be a full review. Oak Creek is under federal scrutiny. No one is above consequence here. Not anymore. Yuri nodded. This school will never be the same, and it shouldn't be. As the office emptied, whispers floated on the air. Rumors of other wrongs, other secrets ready to come undone. The system had lost one of its cruelest cogs, but its gears still turned, oiled by the silence and complicity of too many. Margaret was gone. But as headlines began to swirl and lawyers circled like vultures, everyone at Oak Creek realized the reckoning was far from over. The real battle was just beginning against the very system that made monsters in the first place. The headlines about Mrs. Margaret's arrest had barely faded when Oak Creek's real reckoning began. The school board called it an internal audit. To Yuri and her small team of federal investigators, it was a crime scene, one that stank of privilege, silence, and theft. The archive room was colder than the rest of the school. Tucked beneath a forgotten stairwell, metal shelves sagged with decades of files. Dust motes drifting in the narrow shafts of fluorescent light. Here, the veneer of Oak Creek's respectability wore thin. Yuri's team worked methodically. Laptops whirred, scanners hummed, and files piled up on the long conference table, attendance sheets, grade logs, financial records. At the center, Principal Higgins' private safe stood open, its contents lined up like evidence in a courtroom. It didn't take long for the theft to reveal itself. In folder after folder, the same pattern emerged. Federal funds meant for student enrichment or free lunch were quietly siphoned away. Higgins had signed off on every transaction, the money flowing into shell accounts, and most brazenly into invoices for landscaping improvements, which, as the team discovered, was code for a private mini-golf course installed for the board's annual retreats. Yuri tapped the damning receipts, her jaw clenched. They took food out of children's mouths for a pudding green, she said. The arrogance. A junior investigator, glasses slipping down his nose, slid over a stack of transcripts. It's not just the money, Commander. Look at these grades. One by one, they found them files for the school's brightest black students. Their grades inexplicably lowered just enough to disqualify them from scholarships. Meanwhile, white students, especially those with last names matching the board's donor list, were corrected upward. Notes in Higgins' handwriting marked the margins. Donor family priority. Board seat ensure eligibility. Yuri's fists tightened. He didn't just steal money. He stole futures. As they dug deeper, a sickening timeline emerged. For years, every time a black student reached the top 10, something happened. A sudden drop in grades. A disciplinary issue appearing from nowhere. A lost application. The pattern was systematic, chilling in its efficiency. Yuri called in Sienna and a few other students. Together they sat in the archive room, piecing through the proof of how Oak Creek's gates had always been guarded by invisible hands. Sienna, still bruised but unbowed, worked through the papers with trembling fingers. She stopped at a familiar folder, her own. The folder was thin, but inside she found something that made her breath catch. Her original essay, the one Mrs. Margaret had defaced and torn. The word hero was still visible, but it had been shredded, then half-taped back together by someone with no intention of mending what they broke. Tucked into the papers was something else, a personal check, unsigned from Councilman Whitaker. The memo read, "For School Development College Fund for Bryce." Sienna stared, understanding with a sudden sick clarity. Her destroyed essay and the check had been thrown out together as if to mark the transaction. Her hope discarded for another boy's reward. Yuri noticed, her eyes darkening. This was never about your worth, Sienna. They were always afraid you'd shine too bright. Elsewhere, investigators uncovered emails between Higgins and board members. Can't have another scholarship going to the wrong kid? See to it, the Chamberlain boy gets that spot. No repeats of last year's embarrassment. Each message, each correction, each red pen stroke was a piece of a puzzle that had denied justice to hundreds of children. The dam broke that afternoon. News began to spread first in whispers, then in furious phone calls, then on every parent's phone and every teacher's lips. Oak Creek wasn't an elite academy. It was a fortress for the privileged, built on the backs of those it pushed out, one correction at a time. In the corner, Sienna pieced her essay back together, reading her own words. My mother is a hero because she never lets anyone decide what she can be. She fights even when the whole world calls her a lie. Tears blurred the page, but she kept reading, voice growing stronger. Around her, students listened, some for the first time truly hearing what had been taken from them. Yuri addressed the team. We bring this to the district, to the press, to the courts. Every stolen cent, every altered grade, nothing gets swept away. In the midst of the paperwork avalanche, Sienna glanced at the check and the ruined essay, then looked up, eyes burning with resolve. No more hiding. No more silence. Yuri nodded. It's time to clean house. As the files were boxed for evidence and the truth prepared for daylight, Oak Creek braced for the storm. The reckoning wouldn't just claim a principal. It would force every gatekeeper, every silent accomplice, into the light. The storm that had been gathering above Oak Creek finally broke. News vans idled at the curb. Reporters in immaculate jackets bracing against the late morning wind. Flashbulbs popped and microphones jostled as the school's iron gates became a stage for the kind of spectacle this town pretended only happened in other places. Councilman Whitaker, once untouchable, stood at a makeshift podium in front of the school's stately stone arch. He looked every inch, the statesman, navy suit, American flag pin, a practiced smile for the cameras. The only hint of his unraveling was a bead of sweat on his brow, the way his eyes flickered toward the courthouse beyond the crowd. He gripped the microphone, his voice practiced and solemn. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, thank you for coming. Oak Creek has been the victim of vicious rumors and targeted attacks. My son, he hesitated. The first crack in the mask has struggled, as so many young people do, with the pressures of our modern world. The events of the past week are a tragedy, but they have been manipulated, twisted by those who would divide us. His gaze landed on Sienna and Commander Yuri, standing near the edge of the throng. He spoke louder. Let me be clear. The accusations of corruption, of discrimination, are the product of a smear campaign. My son is ill. He is a victim of a mental health crisis. Our family and this school deserve privacy and respect, not sensationalism. Reporters shouted questions, voices overlapping. What about the missing funds? Senator, is it true scholarships were bought and sold? Did you or your office authorize payments to Principal Higgins? Whitaker shook his head, deflecting, rehearsed. I have full faith in the Oak Creek administration. This is not the time for wild accusations. But before he could continue, the crowd parted. Federal agents, Navy jackets, NCIS badges, walked briskly to the front. At their head was Commander Yuri Williams, her bearing cutting through the chaos like a blade. She held a stack of official files. Evidence tagged and sealed, her face unreadable as she stepped to the microphones. Senator Whitaker, she began, voice amplified by the hush that fell. You are being investigated for conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice in connection with the Oak Creek Scholarship Fund and federal grant program. There is ample evidence that you used your office for personal gain, including the diversion of military contract money into private accounts. Reporters gasped. Microphones thrust forward. Whitaker's composure faltered. His hand tightened on the podium, knuckles white. That's a lie, he sputtered, glancing at the agents closing in. This is a misunderstanding, political theater. Yuri's eyes were ice. We have signatures, wire transfers, email correspondence with Principal Higgins and the school board. Payments traced directly from your office to private accounts, including those connected to your son's education and your personal properties. She signaled to the NCIS officers, you are under arrest. Senator Whitaker, anything you say? Whitaker spun desperate, but the cameras caught it all. the flash of silver as handcuffs snapped around his wrists, the way his shoulders slumped, the outrage that flickered in his eyes before shame took its place. He tried to protest, to summon his old authority, but the words withered. His supporters in the crowd, fellow board members, parents, local officials backed away, distancing themselves as quickly as possible. No one reached out. The world that had made Whitaker powerful simply dissolved, leaving him exposed. Bryce stood off to the side, half shadowed by a news van. He watched as his father, the man who had shaped his every ambition and insecurity, was led away by federal agents. He felt no urge to run, no tears welling up. If anything, the weight in his chest finally eased. Sienna moved closer, quiet in the chaos. She didn't say a word, just slipped her hand into Bryce's, anchoring him in the present. He looked at her, relief and gratitude washing over his tired face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Not for the last time." But this time, it was enough. Together they watched the spectacle, the questions shouted, the cameras rolling. The senator, her father, disappearing into the back seat of a black government car. For once, the narrative was not his to control. Yuri watched as well, her face unreadable. She understood victories like this were rare and always cost more than anyone could guess. She found Sienna's gaze in the crowd and nodded once, acknowledgement, pride, and warning, all in a single gesture. The local news anchor, struggling to sum up the chaos for viewers at home, spoke into the camera. "In a stunning development at Oak Creek, Councilman Whitaker has just been arrested in connection with a far-reaching corruption scandal. This follows days of unrest and allegations of discrimination at the prestigious private school." Now at the center of a federal investigation, as the crowd began to thin, Sienna and Bryce lingered at the edge of the steps. The wind picked up, blowing old leaves and fresh possibilities across the path. Bryce squeezed Sienna's hand, his voice softer than before.